Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session. My name's Lizzie Clitheroe. I'll be moderating the discussion today, and I will let our speakers introduce themselves in one moment. But just to give you a little bit of a flavour for what we've got ahead, we'll be hitting on four main topics. First up, we'll be chatting about some of the fraud trends impacting issuers, payment processors, and financial services. Now, the implications of those fraud trends on authentication, cardholder authentication. We'll be specifically delving a little bit into FIDO, which I think is a hot topic, certainly amongst our customers right now. Then we'll be doing a bit of future gazing. We'll be talking about agentic commerce, which I know a lot of people have questions around and are learning a lot about at the moment. So we're spending a bit of time on agentic commerce, the implications for fraud, implications for liability. And then we'll be wrapping up with a bit of discussion around 3D Secure, what leading issuers are doing today to really modernize 3D Secure, keep ahead of those trends, and also keep in mind that all-important user experience, low friction user experience. So with that, I will pass it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. Graham, hello.
Hi, Lizzie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So my name's Graham Bullock, and I lead the Global Fraud Advisory Consulting Services within Outseer. And my team, so the Fraud Advisory Consulting Services team, is responsible for working with our customers on our platform today to ensure that they accelerate their time to value, they make the most use of all of the features that are available to them. And also we share best practice and we advise on optimizing fraud prevention strategies and policies. So our focus is really on creating value for our existing customers who use our platform today.
And Graham comes with a wealth of experience in fraud prevention, authentication, so knows this space inside out, back to front. As does Neera, our resident payments expert, who we're delighted to have as our guest speaker today. Neera, could you give us a quick intro, please?
Sure, thank you, Lizzie. Delighted to be here. I'm, as Lizzie said, a self-confessed payments nerd with a particular interest in fraud prevention, risk management, cybercrime, and regulation. I'm one of those sad people that actually enjoys reading regulatory text. I've been in payments for longer than I care to remember. I won't bore you with my bio. I am an independent consultant. I am an author. I am an international speaker. My LinkedIn profile is up to date. I'm always delighted to make new connections.
The industry needs those payment nerds that are going to dive into the regulatory text and educate us. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time. Graham, just to kick things off, would love to hear a bit from your perspective. You and your team work with some of the largest issuers in every corner of the globe. What are you hearing right now about those big fraud trends that are either keeping people up all night or really having to change the way people are thinking about their current systems?
Yeah, so if we kind of focus specifically on 3D Secure or e-commerce or card not present fraud, 3D Secure has been around for a long time. One could argue that there's nothing really new and exciting in the 3D Secure world. Look, it has evolved, right? It has evolved quite a lot over the last 20 years. So I've been in cards and payments for over 25 years. Thank you, Lizzie, for not giving away my age. So, I have seen that evolution, but I guess what we're seeing today is it hasn't changed that much generally from, let's say, 10 years ago. Or 50, yeah, I'd say 10 years ago. So when e-commerce and card not present fraud was really starting to spike, we're still seeing similar kind of attack vectors. So e-commerce or card not present is a relatively easy way for fraudsters to scale their operations, right? They don't have to go into individual shops and have a physical card, et cetera, right? So they're continuing to do that scale. What we're getting better at, what we have been getting better at, certainly even 10 years ago, is being more sophisticated in detecting those large-scale, relatively simplistic attacks. Buying card lists, card cycling, card testing, reselling the cards, and then using them for at scale wherever they could. Fraudsters are being a little bit more sophisticated now. So because we've got the measures and the controls in place, and I hope that those who are attending this webinar are pretty comfortable with their fraud prevention posture in terms of like risk-based authentication and leveraging all the signals that are available. There's still some that aren't. But because we're doing that, the fraudsters are having to work hard. And what they're seeing is that kind of let's call technical fraud. So anything that comes through the system, and you can look at the data that's available to you in 3D Secure. And by the way, it was surprising to me, 10, 15 years ago, when speaking to issuers, that they actually preferred they just wanted to challenge everything, and then make a risk decision in authorization. And I was like, well, but you've got actually more data available in the 3D Secure flow. You can make a better decision if you apply the same theory, the same models, the same approach at the authentication layer. Why wouldn't you make the decision there? And then you don't have to challenge everybody. So we're starting seeing a little bit more of that. Because we're doing more of that, the fraudsters are thinking, right, okay, this is pretty tough. I'll try and hit the weak links. So those who aren't using risk-based authentication, those who are using weak authentication methods, countries that are maybe less developed, or they can still scale their attacks. So what we're seeing is the bit that say, okay, well, if I can't steal the cards and get the goods or convert it into cash myself, I will try and get the genuine cardholder to do it for me. So that's what we're doing. And I guess everybody who's attending this will go, yeah, okay, yeah, social engineering and scam fraud. And you've got to be careful of that word scam, because social engineering is a scam, but we're talking about kind of authenticated or first party and third party fraud. So that social engineering, where they can engineer, so they're spending a bit more time. They can still do it at scale, spending a bit more time to socially engineer the authentication data, and then they can perform that fraud themselves. In my opinion, that's still relatively easy to detect, because even though they've got the authentication credentials, it still doesn't look like the genuine cardholder if you're doing a good risk assessment in the background. The really difficult bit is where it's the genuine cardholder being manipulated into making that transaction, performing the authentication, and that's the bit that's hitting the industry, and that's what we're really struggling with. From that, you spawn these more, and they might be more niche, but they still exist, and they're starting to become more prevalent. But things like triangulation fraud, where, for example, fake advertising on a website for a product that is you're offering it for 50%. The branding is all the same. You're representing a merchant. It's all fake. Somebody goes on 50% off. Great, I'll buy it with their card. The fraudster then uses the stolen card to buy the good that you've just bought, the product that you just bought. They buy it from the real merchant on a stolen card, and they ship it to you. So they're kind of getting out of the way with the shipping address. That's fine. You're still getting your product, which is great. But it's using the compromised card to do that. So a bit of triangulation fraud. There was something that we've seen recently. Not sure how widespread this is around the world, but there will be variations of it. But in a well-known British chain of pubs, we would have fraudsters who would set up the fake website where, when you go into that pub, you connect to the Wi-Fi and you put your table number in and you order your drinks and your food. And you think you're doing it through the genuine site. The fraudster is managing all of this. The fraudster buys what you wanted for you and gets it delivered to your table, and they're using a compromised card, and they bank your cash. So we're just seeing all of these kind of really sophisticated, slightly niche fraud attacks. The old stuff still hasn't gone away. And the premise really is two things. One is quick cash out, so things like gift cards, we see that. So quick cash, crypto investments, and that's linked to the scams. So anywhere where the fraudster can quickly get the cash and get it away. And click and collect, there's another one. So getting around those, kind of focusing on delivery address and maybe using that within your policies to go, okay, well, this is a dodgy delivery address, it's just click and collect. So they're buying compromised cards, and then they're going to pick up all the goods, and then they'll resell them on. So the second kind of real premise is that fraudsters are having to make more investment. So they're making more investment, putting more effort in. They're now using AI to make that scalable. but they're still putting in more effort because they're still trying to contact you and spend time with you to manipulate you. But the rewards and the cash out tend to be greater, so higher kind of fraudulent transaction value, but lower volume. So
yeah,
pretty
that's
much what we see.
Yeah, really interesting examples there that because of the things we put in place, fraudsters are having to work harder, and there's a lot more manipulation in the mix than we would have ever expected, back in the day. So,
just a quick one to add on to before I forget, because I just realized this the other day. The biggest for UK, some UK issuers, World Cup tickets, just quite relevant at the moment. So that was the number one fraudulent merchant site a couple of months ago.
Interesting. That doesn't surprise me at all. My other half got stung with an Arsenal ticket scam that not so long ago. It's when Arsenal were like peak, everybody's desperate for a ticket. So yes, that does not surprise me at all. And Neera, from your you've got a really broad perspective across the payments landscape. How much do these themes about manipulation resonate with you?
Oh, it definitely resonates very well. That is actually a testimony to the industry. We've actually got good at managing fraud. Let's not forget about that. Over the past couple of decades, we got better and better because we, the good guys, we use AI as well, and we do all the things, and we do risk assessment. So the technology is there to combat fraud and cybercrime. So we got better and better at controlling fraud. But as Graham pointed out earlier on, attacks have had to evolve. I mean, 2-3 decades ago, we protected the perimeter. Now there is no such thing as a perimeter. So what's the weakest point? The weakest point is, of course, you. So, and once we're really great at authentication, criminals are now essentially weaponizing authentication by social engineering. So completely resonates with what you just said earlier on. Fraud is more sophisticated, but also when we look at the globality of it, for lack of a better term, it's become multi-party. You mentioned triangulation fraud earlier on, all the sophisticated attack. It is now ecosystem-wide, so nobody is immune. And of course, socially engineered, because you are going to try to use the measures that we've put in place, such as authentication, against the ecosystem. So today, fraud, not just in the area we're talking about today, but today fraud essentially manipulates legitimate and genuine customers, because that's what is happening. So modern scams to that effect increasingly start outside of financial services. Financial services is pretty good at risk management and protection and fraud, but modern scams start outside of financial services, and there is an imbalance there, because it will start through social media, it would start through telecoms or indeed any other digital platform before the payment is even made. So that's why we have stuff like investment scams, romance scams, manipulation, and the scams largely begin on social media. The imbalance stems from the fact that those platforms are not accountable, or largely not accountable, and certainly definitely not as regulated as financial services organization. So there is an imbalance there, because the good guys essentially are trying to fight this with largely one hand tied behind their backs. Although, having said that, now the regulation are moving towards a place where platforms are becoming more accountable. So in the UK, for example, it's not the only one. We've got the Online Safety Act. And whilst it mostly targets, tries to protect children and vulnerable people, it is actually shifting the expectation of platforms. So they can no longer just do willy-nilly what they want to do, host scam sites and allow criminals to actually use their platforms to commit crime. So that is really important. The attitude from the regulators is slightly changing, trying to make platforms more accountable. And because that is happening, platforms have essentially to report on things like risk assessments and takedowns, scam sites, and so on and so forth. And that varies across geographies, of course. But what that particularly means for issuers, if we talk about this particular ecosystem player, it's the availability of signal. Graham mentioned data earlier on. Data is extremely important to make better risk decisions. So you will have a lot of data from these platforms, and issuers really should take it upon themselves to actually avail themselves of the data and the signals that may be available from those platforms, essentially to better manage risk.
Yeah, that cross-industry approach is very interesting. And I think, because the financial services are often at the sharp, pointy end of all this. That's where the losses occur, and that's where the pain's really felt. But there's so much stuff happening upstream that the more that can actually get a better view of that, the better we stand to really crack down on this. Yeah, and an interesting example from Australia of the scam prevention framework is taking a very cross-industry approach there of not really just kind of leaving it all at the bank stores to solve. So that's an interesting observation on the trend, Nero, on the regulations kind of going to that way. And you touched a bit about how issuers need to kind of think differently, like look at more data. Graham, is there anything else you'd want to add on, what issuers should be thinking about differently within the current fraud prevention landscape when it comes to fraud prevention and authentication?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing there on authentication is authentication alone isn't enough. So I think we had the mindset a while ago that once we get away from passwords, obviously inherently weak, and then we introduced OTP, and that was stronger, right? So I'm talking about 10 years ago, not today. It was like, it's fine, as long as we can, challenge and the customer can validate, then, that's pretty good. And I think the mistake that we're seeing today is that so authentication has been compromised, and the mistake is that authentication is kind of viewed as an outcome. It's kind of viewed as a standalone. So I'll make all my risk decisions before and I'll decide whether I want to challenge or not. Okay, and that's fine, and that's great. If you do it really well, you're okay. But a lot maybe fall back and going, well, I'll just challenge, and challenge rates are still relatively high, and particularly in Europe, the PSD2 challenge rates went up. But it's you think if I challenge, I'm okay, and you kind of hand off to this weakest link in the chain and say, why are you doing all this really great decisioning first, and then going, I'm not really too sure, so I'll just chuck it out there and let this binary thing tell me whether it's good or it's bad. That authentication basically needs to become part of the process. So the more that you can roll your authentication approach, the delivery of your authentication, and the measurement and the monitoring of your authentication into your overall risk-based authentication posture, then the more secure you are. So that, I think that's maybe the first kind of I don't want to make it sound patronizing, but the first kind of mistake that I think issuers make. The second thing is I'm still to this day kind of surprised how many issuers don't really leverage the full potential of risk-based authentication. And it's there. It's in fact, the data's there, the signals are there. Nero said it earlier. It's about signals. It's not necessarily about data, but it's about signals. We have so many that are available to us. Fraudsters are using them, so why don't we? We have so many signals available to us. Why do we have to challenge as many as we do? You're just opening yourself up for more risk. If you could be better at deciding what is a high-risk transaction, what is a low-risk transaction, then you can remove the opportunity for a fraudster to SIM swap, to obtain the authentication credentials. You just remove it. And I'm amazed. So PSD2 didn't help in Europe. And I could see that in continental Europe, the majority of the financial institutions there just said, okay, I'll add a password back into the process. So I'm strong customer authenticating, it's two-factor authentication, possession of knowledge. It's catastrophic. And but you compare that to and I will use the UK as an example because it's still under the guise of PSD2. They still followed those regulatory technical standards of you have to invoke SCA in certain scenarios, but there's a whole list of exemptions you can leverage. And we have, so if I look at some continental European issuers, they'll still be challenging 80% of all transactions because it always PSD2, I have to. No, you don't. In the UK, some tier ones, they're managing a 25% challenge rate under PSD2. Okay, so they're leveraging all the exemptions. And of that 25%, there's maybe about 7, 8, 9% that is risk-based. So what it means is if you're in the US and you don't have to adhere to PSD2 and you can basically decide, I'm going to challenge, I'm going to allow, I'm going to deny, I can do whatever the heck I want. You shouldn't really need to challenge any more than 5, 6, 7, 8% if you're doing really strong risk-based authentication. So that's I guess my main observation, and what issuers I think really need to focus on is that there's a whole ton of signals out there. There are a ton of sophisticated platforms. We have had AI machine learning models for years. Leverage them. Don't just think, oh, I'm going to have a set of rules and I'm going to base them on value. Terrible customer experience. Fraud will leak through. It's just horrific. You can have really, really incredible 3D secure experience if you do that risk-based authentication really well in the background. So that would be, I suppose, my key kind of observation is really leverage or really harness what you can with what's available to you, because many of you aren't out there. My team works with our customers day in, day out to help them do that. So I'm talking from a position of experience. I've seen it. I've seen how it works. I've seen that it can work, and I've seen the fraud levels, and there is less risk involved if you have a very strong policy-driven, risk-based authentication-driven approach, leveraging machine learning models and AI in there, than if you say, I'm going to challenge 90% of my transactions, and don't even get me started on success rates. So yeah, that's fun. You can do more on RBA.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a clear message. I like it. And I think you're in a position that you're able to benchmark across different issuers from seeing what challenge rates are like, what effect that has on the fraud detection rate. It's all a balancing act to some extent, but there's a lot you can do to fine tune it with the right things in place. Yeah. And Graham, is there any other technologies that you advise, things like behavior biometrics to help to address evolving fraud types?
So coming back to this, I think Neera mentioned it, Lizzie, I think you mentioned it, but the layered approach. So you just mentioned behavioral biometrics, which I was dealing in behavioral biometrics 6 years ago and trying to convince financial institutions that this would really help, and it was like the dark arts. Don't want to touch it, can't work. But the thing is, it's not. I think they thought that that there's a lot of hype around it. It's like it's a silver bullet. It's not a silver bullet. It's just part of a layered approach. If you're not leveraging it, you're at a disadvantage. If you are, it's not going to save everything, but you can pull some really strong signals out of there that are going to help for you to identify fully authenticated fraud. Absolutely, it's fantastic at that. Where we're getting the first party manipulation, so the scam fraud, probably the hardest fraud type to try and defend against today, right? And I've heard this across quite a few issues. Incredibly difficult, and there's so many different ways to approach it. Behavioral biometrics is not going to solve that, but it will absolutely help. It will help to reduce false positives in there. It will give you some really key signals. So things like active call, but you can't just go, oh, it's an active call, must be on the phone with a fraudster, so we'll just deny this. You've got to pull everything else in. Is it their normal behavior? What does my risk score say? What does the merchant? Who's the, so a layered approach work, but pulling in things like behavioral biometrics will absolutely help.
Yeah. Okay, great. And if folks have any questions as we go along, there is the ability to add questions in the event chat or the Q&A function. We can either try and get to them in the conversation, or we can follow up online. So please do fire any questions over for our speakers as we go. So moving topic slightly, obviously very, very relevant, but Neera, we've established that on authenticating the user does not necessarily mean there is no fraud. It's not the silver bullet. It's not the check, this is not fraud. There's a lot of talk at the moment around certain types of authentication, though. FIDO I'd love to delve into, as it's that bit more phishing resistant than a lot of things in place at the moment. You see this as part of the mix, and what's your take on FIDO authentication for issuers and payment processors?
Well, like any technical measure, it is a good thing, and as exactly as Graham just said earlier on, it's not a silver bullet. It is a good thing to be used as part of the stacks. There are many signals to be had, and I want to go back to something that Graham said earlier on in terms of 3DS hasn't moved much. You're in it. I actually think 3DS has actually evolved dramatically from version 1. I mean, we've got like 10 times more data or more. It's a question of who is actually using the data in order to manage risk, because it is there to do those things. And I also wanted to pick up on one point, which is really dear to my heart, where Graham said, we have rules. We are not in the era of rules. We are in the era of context and attributes, which all of the signals that you're given as part of an interaction contribute to you making a better decision or even a better prediction. Because we move so fast now, we've got faster payments, new rail and everything else, and everything is so instant that we need not only to be able to react instantly, we also need to be able to predict what might happen so that we make the right decision. So FIDO to me is absolutely a positive evolution on authentication, and indeed modern versions of 3DS do support this. We're a long way from 3DS version 1 with that clunky pop-up, which still did reduce fraud. It was a good tool, but we've moved on. We've moved on since then. So does it have a place? Absolutely, it has a place as part of a layered authentication stack, and I would even say of a layered risk management stack. And the reason why I make that distinction is because generally financial institutions only see the end of the journey. They actually don't see what happened before that led to that transaction. So they also need all these other signals of before the transaction even takes place in order to make a better risk decisions. So it needs to be an integral part of the fraud stack according to the risk appetite, and absolutely agree with Graham. It's not a question of I'm going to challenge everything. It's use the tools that are available to you. More importantly, use the data that is available to you as standard, such as with 3D Secure, for example, and the new year version, but also all the other signals, and Graham mentioned some of them, some weaker than others. You've got telco signals, you've got SIM swap, active call. Is active call a really good signal or a weak signal? I mean, people are generally on the call anyway. That's not necessarily to a fraud stack. Can you make a risk decision on that? I doubt it. It is still a signal, but there are all sorts of other signals that can be used, and it's a matter of integrating them within the fraud stack as far as issuers are concerned, and seeing where else they can actually get the signals, which essentially is going back to my earlier point, which is collaboration cross-industry with social media platforms, with telcos, and so on and so forth, to actually integrate that as part of a stack. In Europe, the regulations are definitely pushing for this. We have the impending PSD3, as you both know. So delegated authentication is, of course, extremely important, and a feature that is actually available to everyone. But as Graham said earlier, it's not the be all and end all. So, and it's all about having a layered strategy. So PSD3 in Europe will actually brings us an evolved, so to speak, stronger customer authentication framework. And if we look at what's been happening, not just in Europe, there is this evolution towards risk-based authentication. Because things move so fast, we're incredibly more digital. They're going to be even faster, and we'll talk about that later when we get to agentic commerce. So it's, for me, it's going to be how well are you integrating all the signals into the architecture as part of a broader transaction risk model. And I think that's really the key, not just, how strong is the credential, because that doesn't cut it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Graham, could you tell us a little bit about how Outsia is working with customers on rolling out banking grade FIDO authentication that does use that layering and that approach that Neera just touched upon?
Yeah, I think that's probably the key point is, integrating and the layering. So the first thing to say is that with FIDO, I think it was actually the US was ahead of Europe in terms of understanding FIDO and the FIDO development. And I remember a few years ago conversations happening across Europe about FIDO, and a lot of issues like, what's this? How does it work? The good news is that there's a recognition globally that FIDO is a stronger way to authenticate than OTP and some other methods. It's being built into majority of devices, if not all devices that we see today, so it's there to be used. So it's stronger, right? So that's the first thing. We should be looking at it. We should be looking to adopt it. Outsia we have made it available, so that's obviously a key message, because we recognize we have a very strong risk posture. So we want to bring to market the innovative products that will help our issuers and protect our issuers and bring more value. So the fact that we brought it in and put it in, that should send a message to the industry that it's valuable. The key thing is it's not in isolation and it needs to be integrated. So, my team as well work with the issuers when there are new products, new innovations, new features available on the platform. Say, okay, this is what it does. This is how it relates to fraud and how it can relate to fraud performance. Here's the advice on how we can integrate that. You don't just integrate it in isolation. Consider your other authentication options. Also consider what sits behind that in terms of risk-based authentication, how you leverage the signals from all of those different approaches. So that would be the key thing about what to think about with deploying FIDO. I say I'm really pleased that we've got it available, and the sooner issuers adopt it and roll it out, I think the better for all of us. One not word of warning, but something to hide. It's against not a silver bullet, so it's not going to protect against manipulation in the first party. So that's why you need to integrate it into your approach, and you need to be able to make those decisions behind the scenes, before and after, of does this fit within the context of how Graham usually goes about paying for things. Even though it is him, do we think it's his intent to do so? So leveraging behavioral biometrics as part of that approach, leveraging features available like active call, but not in isolation, layer it all in. So the integration bit of FIDO is key. Again, we shouldn't just go, the silver bullet, great, FIDO is stronger than OTP. Is it available out here? Yes, it is. Bung it in. Great, off we go. No fraud.
Yeah, that would we to aspire to, no fraud. But in reality, Graham, I'm just going to throw you a question that's come up around behavioral biometrics while I've got you, asking about whether behavioral biometrics functionality is limited by the device used by the customer.
So behavioral biometrics, well, obviously there's behavioral biometrics through SDK on smart devices. So if you don't have a smart device, then yeah, I don't know many people who have smart device, but there may be some. Okay, we need to have some exceptions. The the other piece is it's on the deployed on web as well. So the restrictions around that are the restrictions from the browser in terms of what information can be captured on behavioral biometrics. There's also some, depends on where you are in the world, but some legality around GDPR, for example, so privacy and consent. And does behavioral biometrics need explicit consent? Is it classed as legitimate interest? You need to tick a box. So those, for me, the technical side of it is probably less impactful than the regulatory side of it, because if you can't deploy it, you can't use it. If you're going to have to ask an individual to give consent every time they're going to pop up, they might, but the fraudster won't. So still leverage that signal though. So I think the regulatory side is a little bit more important. There are restrictions on the technical side, absolutely, but again, silver bullet, it is not. But there are, a lot of cases where behavioral biometrics data is available and you can capture it and you can leverage it, and it is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, we were doing some analysis around sometimes when it's in that grey area of uncertainty, when it's it's not clearly fraud, it's not clearly trusted, but it's in that grey area, and that's where it can be really, really powerful to give an extra signal that can push something to one way or the other to make it a lot easier to action upon.
Yeah, and it's not only fraud, Lizzie. So sometimes because we, I'm a fraud manager, or I'm a fraud advisor, or I'm working fraud spaces, fraud. It's, AI machine learning models gave us the ability to actually distinguish between what looks good and what looks nefarious. I think before we just go, right, create some rules to stop nefarious activity. Now we have the ability to say, this looks good. Now that's a really important signal. So reducing false positives, or if you understand better what looks good for that individual, if you're building behavioral profiles, all of this stuff, and you can quite confidently say, I think it is Graham, I think it is Lizzie, then you're gonna effectively be better at identifying nefarious behavior, just because you take all the good stuff out and go, right, great, don't need to focus on that. Now I can really drill down onto what looks like fraud. So that would be another key message: is we don't just get hell-bent on identifying fraud and figuring out what fraud is, and behavioral biometrics will help to identify all nefarious activity and all of this. Don't forget about the good behavior, because that is that the majority of your transactions are good.
Yes. True. Switching topics to a big one that I think will, there's a lot of interest around this at the moment. Neera, you've written about agentic commerce, I know. I'd love to hear your take on what excites you about it, but also what makes you nervous about it. What do you think the big challenges that lay ahead?
Absolutely, I'm at the same time excited and slightly terrified, but it's really very, very interesting. And going back to what Graham just said about using the right signals to do the right thing, looking at what we've just said earlier on, monitoring what looks good, but also what doesn't look good. And indeed, that would allow to improve the customer experience, because in Europe specifically, if you make use of the transaction risk analysis exemption, you've got a lot of things that you need, which is essentially analyzing patterns of what is good and what is bad to be able to better determine whether this is a genuine transaction or not. And if you're able to do that as an organization, which essentially means being really hot on data and analyzing it, then you'd be a better place to do that. It's no different with agentic commerce in principle. Because in principle, you want to be able to identify that the bot is indeed authorized to act. And that would be the authentication piece. So we started talking about the parallel of KYC, which is KYA, know your agent. So you need to be able to authenticate your agent. It's exactly the same thing as what we've just talked about. Good authentication doesn't necessarily mean that there is intent that when they're to actually fulfill the transaction. There is no indication as to whether, whilst it is a legitimate bot, that they actually acted within their boundaries and restraints that were previously specified. So very similar, but you have to overlay something on top of this whole new infrastructure. You have to identify intent. And going again, we were talking about behavioral biometrics. Behavioral biometrics is about identifying patterns and whether you normally do that sort of stuff. And if you don't, maybe the intent wasn't there. So as I said, it's following in parallel to what we've already doing. It's a fascinating thing. And again, it's the same principle. All of this needs to sit within a layered fraud stack, because we are starting to see real life in production transactions on agentic commerce. It's not widespread yet, but the technology is there to do so, and all of these things have standards associated with them, not as yet necessarily interoperable. We've seen MasterCard, we've seen Visa, we've seen Stripe doing a lot of things to be able to make the ecosystem more secure when it comes to agentic commerce. So doing all of that means essentially trying to find out, which standards will be applicable. And for issuers, more specifically, it's about proving not only the legitimacy of the agent, as in they are authorized to act on behalf of the real account holder, but that the intent was there to perform the transaction in the first place. So proving the legitimacy of the agent, not just the customer, and certainly that moves beyond identity, and it can become quite complex. So and that slightly terrifies me, because it raises all sorts of questions. Suddenly, I mean, in the traditional world, we have first-party fraud, and you have people essentially lodging chargebacks because, well, they decided they've changed their mind, and they still have the goods. So first-party fraud absolutely happens. Now we're going to see a different kind of third-party fraud, I think, with agentic commerce, where the customer may very well say, it's not me, it was my bot. How do you actually prove liability in that kind of context? I mean, that is very interesting. So I'm sure the commercial models and the regulatory models will evolve in line with the way the industry is moving.
It wasn't me, it was my bot. Yeah. It's going to become a real problem. Graham, what advice would you have for issuers right now who are concerned about the fraud implications of agentic commerce?
I mean, I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, right? Is the fraud implications. So agentic commerce sounds pretty cool. I quite like the idea of that. Merchants will like the idea of that as well. They can automate all of this. They can make it efficient. They can cut out they can stop kind of, what do you call it? Basket abandonment, because they can, dynamically change pricing and all of this stuff. So it's quite exciting, but I'm not excited about it from a fraud perspective. We don't know enough about it. We don't really know what's happening, as Nero was saying. The standards and the framework's key. And until that is defined, and until we know, and from an interoperability perspective, what it looks like, it's very difficult to kind of advise on the security posture of it. We just know it's coming, and it's going to happen, and it's going to bring with it a whole new challenge around fraud management. The key thing I think I would say is that, in line with what Nero is talking about as well, is that as an issuer, you need to be part of that conversation. You can't let You can't let the schemes decide for you. You can't let the merchant or the acquiring or acceptance community decide for you. You can't let the interoperability layers decide for you. We all have, I think, a responsibility there as part of the ecosystem to provide our input and make sure that nobody's making the decisions for us, because if you don't provide input into that, somebody else will, and it may not suit your business needs. So that would be my key advice. We're in this development phase now, trying to figure it out. What comes down the line in terms of fraud, we're not too sure. So be part of the conversation now, be part of the input, help to develop that, and then I think naturally we'll start to understand the implications, and then we'll be able to develop the security posture against it.
Yeah. And for anybody who is looking to read up a little bit more on this topic, Outseer just commissioned a report with the analyst firm Datos Insights, specifically around agentic commerce, and it's advice for issuers of things to think through, things about like know your agent. It's got some interesting frameworks in there. So we can drop the link to that document. It's quite a long read, so it should be fairly informative, but I'd advise taking a look at that if this is a topic of interest. And Neera, I mean, we touched on it a little bit with the agentic commerce, but I'd love to delve into the liability issue a little bit more. I guess both with authenticated fraud and with the rise of agentic commerce, is the liability frameworks that we rely on, are they kind of being ripped up right now? How do you see that?
So of course we've got the liability shift framework under 3DS, and that's a very good thing, and that's something that works for the way things are now. Now with agentic commerce, it becomes a bit difficult because the liability becomes more complex. And I go back to what I was saying earlier on. Until those frameworks, which were not built for agentic, they were built for humans, essentially, and you can have behavioral biometric and demonstrate the behavior of a human, and so forth. So you can do all those good things. But when you have agentic in the mix, the existing liability frameworks are actually built on assumptions that basically both social engineering, which we've talked about quite a lot at the beginning of this webinar, and agentic commerce are starting to unravel slightly. So until these frameworks can actually evolve in the same way, and I'm the schemes are staying still, or indeed the standards are staying still, they're certainly looking at that, but these frameworks, such as verifiable intent, for example, and similar for the big players, are not yet deployed at scale. So it's a matter of seeing where the market's going to go. I mean, are the framework going to evolve faster than agentic gets deployed or not? Otherwise we'll have a gap either way.
Anything to add to that, Graham?
No, I think Neera's covered it all. It's a huge topic, and it's the one thing I'd say about liability is that liability in 3D Secure was basically brought in as the driver for adoption. Right, it needed to start somewhere. You need to get a critical mass of the ecosystem on 3D Secure, both on the merchant side and on the issuing side, to make it work. So how do you do that? Well, one of the drivers was the liability shift. Personally, now we've evolved so much that in the 3D Secure world, from a liability perspective, it's not in traditional kind of e-commerce transactions. It's no longer the driver. It's just kind of one of the inputs. It's one of the inputs into your decisioning as to what am I going to do with this transaction from the merchant side and from the issuer side, right? Am I going to send it down 3DS rails? The issuer, am I going to, how am I going to deny it? Am I going to allow it? So they will factor in a bit of liability in there. So I didn't want to, talk. I think Neera's covered everything from an agentic perspective on liability, but one thing that popped into my head there was the enhanced data share only, which is relatively new, that's coming out. And I think that was really trying to encourage, where there are still merchants out there who don't want to send their transactions down the 3DS rails for fear of friction and shopping cart abandonment. And we see this quite a lot in North America, where they will use it because of the liability shift, but just for high risk transactions. Okay, this is my biggest risk. So biggest loss here. I'll let the issuer take the liability on that. Anything else, I'll take the risk on it. Enhanced data share only is really to try and encourage them to send the low and medium risk transactions through the rails. And there's a number of reasons for that. It means that you mentioned it earlier, Neera, it's like the more data we have from the ecosystem, not just my data as an issuer to make a decision, when it can see it further upstream. So before the transaction comes in for authentication, if I can get hold of that data, we're all going to make a better decision. So, from that perspective, we should see better decisions being made at authorization, less false declines, less shopping cart abandonment and all that. So I really kind of urge those issuers merchants who are not sending all transactions down the 3DS pipe to do so. The second benefit is when you're training AI machine learning models on what looks good and what looks bad and what behavior is, so that you can better identify fraudulent transactions. If all you're getting fed is high risk transactions, your learning's skewed. So the more you can send that are all the transactions, and then the model has a better understanding of what looks like good, not just everything you're sending me is high risk. So there's a real benefit for the industry there as well, with just better decisioning.
Yeah, and to add to that, Graham, when we look at it, I mean, we talked about agentic commerce in the confines of bots making purchases or starting transaction on behalf of consumers, but there's also the added dimension of bots buying from bots, which is perfectly possible. If I have my bot, you have your bot, I'm buying from you, and our bots talk together, and all of those things. So that and that's not necessarily high value transactions. So these may be low value transaction. There may be micro transaction. The standards are not yet built for this kind of work, where we have to the fraud discussion needs to shift very, very clearly to things like reimbursement when you're talking about chargeback, and where do you actually shift the liability. And the scheme rules, I have no doubt, will actually evolve over time, and it's all a question of data. You're absolutely right. If all you're feeding the model is high risk transaction, you're not getting a profile of what you're actually doing in your business.
Yeah, we need those models to learn on agentic behavior alongside human behavior, because we're going to have both in parallel. So we did as much data as possible, and we will have the AI machine learning models that will be built and specifically for agentic commerce, so we can distinguish between nefarious bots and your bot, Neera. I think you're going to trademark that. It wasn't me, it was my bot. I like it.
It says it all, really. And I'm just looking at the question in the chat saying, how can you best prevent fraud that is initiated by scams, misbehavior of card user? I think you've already answered that question. It's all about the data. I mean, that's all I will say on the subject. It's how you deploy the technology that is already available, that gives you the data. It's basically use it. And of course, cross-industry collaboration is extremely important, because, as we've already said, scams originate on financial platforms. It's way, way before that.
Yeah. And Graham, did you have anything else to add on how you and your team, when you're working with issues on 3DS programs, how do you really add value to that 3DS program?
I mean, it's really it's an extension of our customers' fraud teams, where we can be. So I guess as kind of independent consultants, but we're independent consultants who are incredibly knowledgeable on the platform that they're using. So it's this combination of what we're aiming for as fraud advisors is to consult with our customers and help them make more accurate decisions through recommendations. And the way that we do that is through a blend of the technology that's available. So what are the features that are available on the platform that they may not know about or may not know how to use them, that you can deploy for certain policies? It is the ability to understand how the model works in more detail and work with data science to ensure that, you know, it's tuned and it's trained, and if there are any gaps in that model, then those gaps are bridged. It's also, so the team has this kind of unique position whereby we work across our customer base, across geographies, across issuers, across different sizes. So we kind of see it all. And it's almost this kind of consortium grade insights or information sharing. So we're able to, you know, we work together as a team, we'll see what fraud attacks are happening, and we'll know kind of immediately, because it's happened somewhere else, or what was successful, how do we successfully prevent that? And we can very quickly deploy that and share that with our, the rest of our customer base across the world. And best practice, you know, just generally what works well. We do this day in, day out. We're 100% focused on value for the customers, so they get maximum value out of that platform, and therefore we know what not so good looks like. We know the key indicators, we know the signals, we know the features, we know the rule sets, the policies that are effective, and we're really happy to share that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we said the word data about 1 million times in this presentation, but it's really understanding the data, understanding how that looks across, how to benchmark that across different customers or different companies, but also really getting into that, like, really fine-tuned, how do you get that right balance, and how do you constantly keep improving, because the fraudsters are constantly coming up with ways to get past it, right? So if you stay stagnant, you're not going to get very far.
So I think one of the other benefits, you know, from the outset platform, what we're trying to do is create native signals and native technologies. Behavioral biometrics is a great example of that. And even FIDO is not native, but it's deployed, it's integrated into the platform. So we're making all of these features available on the platform, new innovations that are coming along, and make sure it's there. What we want to do is make sure that the customers understand, or our issuers understand, what's available to them now and how to use it. So, you know, behavior biometrics, for example, may be relatively new to a lot of people. You know, we can help deploy that, and it sits alongside and it's fully integrated into the rest of that layered approach. So how do you integrate that into your existing policies? How does it work alongside some, you know, with FIDO? How does it work alongside other authentication methods? How does, you know, what data is available, what signals are available, what signals are effective? So the fact that everything kind of sits in one place, and there's not a, you know, handing off to a third party for them to then provide something back, it all sits with us. So my fraud advisors can see it all holistically, and how it all works together and in a layered way, and make more accurate and insightful recommendations.
Absolutely. So we're about at time. Thank you very much for everybody that did throw in a question. Sorry to those we didn't get. We'll try and follow up afterwards. But Neera, Graham, thank you very much for your insights. I think we covered really interesting topics and covered a lot of ground, and some of the things that are really kind of those big ticket items there at the moment. And just, I guess, just to quickly summarize, I'd say that, you know, a lot of modern fraud that we're dealing with is really driven by manipulation. It's trying to trick the good customer into doing something that's not in their interest, or bypass the good controls we've got in place. And authentication is hugely important, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. We believe very strongly that, you know, more better forms of authentication, such as FIDO, will really help, but only when it's really closely tied with that fraud decisioning, that fraud intelligence, and understanding the full risk profile, as opposed to treating it as a tick box exercise. Yeah, and we look forward, we'll definitely be keeping tabs on the agentic commerce piece and seeing how that plays out, and trying to provide some guidance. So feel free to check out our white paper on that, or the Data Insights white paper on that. We've also got some pieces on FIDO written up, so feel free to head to our resources section of our website, and there's plenty of reading there. So with that, I will wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you, Neera. Thank you, Graham. I really appreciate your time today.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.